Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Game Dev London podcast. I'm your host for today, Roxanne Marshall. You can refer to me as she, her. Today, I'm crashing through the walls between film and game and film, bringing interactivity of games to a traditionally linear watching experience of films. I'm talking about The Gallery. It's a full motion video / live action interactive film / game. Luckily, I'm joined by someone who can explain it much better than I can. Director Paul Raschid, welcome so much. Thanks for joining us today. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about The Gallery.
Hey, Roxanne. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Paul Raschid, the writer-director of The Gallery. And yeah, it is basically an interactive film / live action video game. And it is a hostage thriller about an art curator who ends up taken hostage by a seemingly deranged portraitist who demands that they sit all night while they paint them. And you have to make the decisions of how to interact with your hostage taker and how to escape. The choices you make will not only define your fate, but the fate of other characters. And actually, there are effectively two stories in one. There is one with a female protagonist set in 1981 and one with a male protagonist set in 2021. So a lot to sink your teeth into there.
There really is. So you mentioned there's two different stories that are kind of parallel to each other, but in different decades. And I've seen that both of that kind of period of time was in kind of political and social unrest. What was the decision behind setting it within that environment?
Well, it was kind of with The Gallery. It was a project that I was developing for a number of years. So it kind of just layered on top of each other. So first and foremost, I knew I definitely wanted to have two narratives with a female protagonist and a male protagonist to just explore how that context would change your perception of how you approach the hostage situation, just from the point of view of gender. But again, as I was approaching these two stories, when we went and saw, funny enough, the location, which was this lovely country estate, well, not country estate, but this lovely stately home in North London, in Finchley, actually. I was sort of doing a recce, looking around the rooms, and a lot of the rooms felt very period. They looked like they hadn't changed in decades. So I actually was like, let's lean into this gift of a location that we've got and have one of the storylines set in a different era. So then I started doing research, and I knew I wanted the modern one to be in 2021, which is when we were shooting at the height of the pandemic and all the other unrest that was going on in the country at that time. And then I noticed when I was doing my research that 81, which was exactly 40 years prior, there were a lot of parallels socio-politically within the country. And it just felt like a really nice natural fit for that to be the era in which that was set. So it was something that came about actually through logistics, almost more than something that was done at a script stage. It was sort of done in the pre-production stage of once we saw where we were shooting and what we could get from that location, which is kind of what happens in filmmaking sometimes. So yeah, that's kind of how it came about.
Wow. And the story, so I was playing this last night, and I found myself every time I made a decision, and you kind of see something pops up in the corner for anyone who hasn't experienced it, where it kind of tells you that a consequence is kind of happening based on your decision. And every time I was kind of thinking, wow, what would have happened if I'd chosen the other one? And I think it's so replayable in that sense. But all I could think about was the kind of algorithms and story mapping behind that must be such a huge job. How do you even start to tackle that?
So a really good question. I think it's something that, I've been making interactive films, live action video games, FMV games, however you want to call them, since 2019. So that was when I first got the opportunity to do it, was the Complex. And it was something when I did that for the first time. Obviously Bandersnatch had just come out, but there was very little sort of precedent that had been set with regards to interactive, how to map these stories out. So that was sort of, I was very much a fish out of water, kind of learning how to do them. But I think now I've done about 5 of these now. So it's kind of a way that I just think about story in general, just sort of, it always branches off, but I always start with a flow chart, basically. Before you even look at a script, you have to start with a flow chart. And map out your structure. So you'll have one scene, and then it will branch off into 2 different options, or 3 if you have 3, or maybe even 4. And then those may branch out, and then you kind of leave. So that's my starting point. Before I even think of anything else, I just need the structure. I need to have like two sentences of what happens in the scene, and then where that's going to branch out to, where that's going to branch out to, and that's just the Bible. Once you start that and you've got your structure locked, that's where you then go onto afterwards. So it's you've kind of just got to break it down into sort of various stages, as the two key things are your flow chart and then your script, which kind of reads like a choose your own adventure book. You know, the ones where you get to the bottom and it would be option A, go to this page, option B. So those are the two key components of it. But definitely, you know, before you start anything, you just need your skeleton. And you know, that's that. Once you've got that down and you approach a story in those terms, then everything kind of layers on as a result of that.
I'm glad you made the connection between kind of choose your own adventure books, because that's how I've been describing it to people, and I loved experiencing those when I was younger. And this is kind of different in that once you make a decision, you can't just flick back. You have to kind of commit to the decision you've made, and along the way you can kind of still change the kind of dynamic and of the characters and where you go, which I think is really interesting. What else inspired you to create something like this? Was it because you mentioned, you know, choose your own adventure books? Was there particular films or games that inspired it?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first got the opportunity to do an interactive project back in 2019, I played a lot of games, and the biggest inspiration for me was Until Dawn. That for me was just, you know, the apex of how to combine something very cinematic in storytelling with something that's interactive, and where you know, your choices matter, and you know, there's a real malleability within characters and the story and everything like that. So obviously, growing up, Heavy Rain was another game that I played that was very, you know, very influential on me in those kinds of storylines. And then even within the film world, you know, you had things like Sliding Doors, which, you know, explored the consequences of your actions and the knock-on effects. So that delved into causality and the creation of alternate realities as a result of that, which I guess is sort of, you know, that's been explored very, very deeply at the moment in lots of stuff. I mean, even Everything Everywhere All at Once. You know, it's about multiverses and how one decision can have a knock-on effect and change the trajectory of your life, kind of thing. So I think it's something that, you know, now is very much, especially in the film world, at the forefront of people's consciousness. But, you know, I was always a casual gamer growing up, and, you know, playing games where your choices mattered and affected the story, as well as choose your own adventure books when I was, you know, really, really young. So it was always been a style of storytelling that's been present in my, you know, my life and my journey as a storyteller. So it was always something that fascinated me and something I wanted to have the chance to sort of experiment with. And when I got the opportunity to get into interactive films, I really got to delve into it on a deeper level and make these things.
And speaking of stories, when we create games, and I guess films as well, we're always thinking about what emotion we want to provoke and evoke. What were you thinking about when you created this, of how you wanted the player to feel? Because I'm very empathetic, and I found myself really struggling at some point to be like, do I want to help her? Do I want to cause a bit of drama? Like, do I want to be kind? Where was your head at when it comes to that?
That's exactly what I want to cause in everybody, in the player or the viewer or whatever you call it. I think that's the key is just having malleability within the story and how people can approach it. You know, because there is no right answer. That's the ultimate. You know, people can build whatever story that they want to without me. I don't want people to feel like there is a right way to play something or a right way to experience it in any of my interactive films, because it's very much the story you want to build. So you could play Morgan and make decisions for Morgan as if you were yourself, you know, what you would do in her shoes, or you could look at Morgan as her own autonomous character and make decisions for what you think are most true to how you perceive her character, or you could make them in a way that, you know, you want to create an arc for her, that you want to see where she starts and you want to create a journey for her and her perception. Or, you know, maybe it depends on your view on Dorian, or you could just want to be an agent of chaos, as you said, and just cause some trouble and see what happens. And I think that is the most interesting part of this. And again, looping back to the film world, I know Disney have created a whole animated series called the What If series, which is, you know, exploring some of their big franchises about, you know, what if this happened instead of that happened, or that character died. And I think that's something that audiences are really interested in exploring, especially people who watch films and stuff, because
Mm.
in film it's a lean back experience, and you have to just watch, and you're presented with what the writer has chosen to do and what they've chosen to create. And I think that's once you give that agency to the player, as happens in video games, more often than not, people will want to explore the things that feel less logical or
Mm.
less advisable to do. It's like, why do people play GTA and then start driving on the pavement and driving off cliffs and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Because people want to explore that what if, like, what if I just do things like that are really illogical and stupid and reckless? What are the repercussions of that? So I think you can totally play the gallery and do that, and you will end up with an outcome that reflects that style of decisions that you've made. So just to loop back to your original question, it's very much intentional that you want people to have the option to go various different paths with it, regardless of but ultimately, I just want people to know that there's no correct way of playing it. It depends. The objective is something that you can totally set for yourself when you go
Yeah.
into.
And that's such a kind of fundamental of writing a game, is wanting the player to care about the story, to drive the story forward on their own. And I think thriller, um, which is, I guess, part of the genre of the gallery, is the perfect example, because you often watch thrillers and horror and you're in the background like, no, why would you go through that door, or why would you do that? But you actually get to make that decision, so it's really immersive in that sense. what what do you think is like the next thing with this immersion? Because I found myself so like, I played literally until my laptop died yesterday. I don't know how long I was playing for, but I was really immersed. Do you see something like this translating at some point into VR, AR, or other kind of even deeper interactivity?
Well, no. Well, first of all, I'm so glad that it hooked you in that way, and that you felt so immersed, because that's the key of what I always try to strive to achieve when making these things. But I think with the gallery, it's been a real step forward in my career in interactive storytelling, because we were able to show it to cinema, cross over to a cinema audience for the first time, which was an incredible thing to see, because when the way it worked is people would go into the cinema and we would give them glow sticks, and then every time there was a decision, people would raise their glow sticks to vote for whichever option they wanted. And it's in those like sort of 3-4 second moments where they had to make the decision, you would hear kind of groans or laughs or people conferring with each other, and you're creating an interaction, not just with the story that you've made. It's not just an interactive film that they're watching, but it's interaction amongst each other. So you're creating this communal experience, which is why I think the beauty of these things is that they're brilliant to experience on your own. And you can explore the story in the way that you would personally want to do it, but they're also great to experience as a group. And there's a sense of togetherness, watching them on a Twitch stream, watching them in a cinema, where you're collectively discussing the choices or making the choices together. So that's definitely something that I want to explore further. I'd love to have more of these films playing, these films playing as group experiences in cinemas, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of, and it's creating a secondary immersion and interactivity to it,
Yeah.
that I think is really exciting, and that people are really looking for. But I would say definitely there's a huge opportunity in VR and AR for this. I mean, again, that's not at the moment where my interest is. My interest is still exploring how deep, what the possibilities within genre are. So, like you said, thriller is so great for that. Horror. I've made 2 rom-coms, which are really, so any genre which inherently has at the heart of it, high stakes decisions, which, as a screenwriter, you're always taught, no matter what genre you're making, it's important that your protagonist is constantly making decisions that will change the trajectory of their character anyway. So if you take that principle, it means that any genre could work with interactivity. Something, as high as life or death stakes, like the gallery, or something as simple as being on a date with someone, where your brain is constantly making micro decisions every second, being like, should I say that? Is that the right thing to say? Do they like me? Oh no, have I messed it up? Should I do this? So any kind of genre which has those kinds of decisions that will grab a viewer and make them feel like they matter, and put stake and tension on it, I think works. So I'm definitely want to explore that, how much, what the, in a story sense, what avenues there are to explore in in the format. But as you said, there are so many barriers to break and so many different boundaries we can cross with regards to the level of immersion that I'm just getting started with.
Awesome. I want to go back to what you were talking about, that kind of group watching. As you said, you've had the kind of glow stick mechanic, which I just think is just so much fun. I would never have really thought of playing along with friends, but on one of the kind of intro screens, it says, you know, the pause option could be to play with friends. And I can really see that being something that becomes quite popular. And I think lockdown helped with that, especially when it comes to gaming. We found a lot of people becoming social gamers because they wanted that connection across the time when you couldn't have it face to face. So I think that's going to definitely continue with things like that. And I think it's really important that you're kind of bringing that opportunity to people. Yeah, it's really exciting.
No, thanks. I think I totally agree. I think especially since lockdown, I think, you know, purely from a more practical sense, you know, I think people especially when when they're going out and stuff, they want to do activities that are more hands-on, that they have more agency in, you know, things like there's a rise of, even in cinema, which is kind of a subset of this, you've got things like secret cinema, you've got the immersive, I don't know if you've seen, there's that immersive experience where it's like a dinner and you eat what is going on so I think people want to engage with their content in a more hands-on way, like that, in a more immersive way that gives them more agency to feel like they are affecting the story, or they're within the story, or that their senses are being stimulated in more of a way just then leaning back and watching a film. So I think that it's a subset of that as well. That I think people are just looking for things, that they're looking for more interactivity in their, you know, their recreational time, and from the content that they consume, which is, again, you know, probably as a result of the rise in gaming, and people, you know, looking at things in gaming terms. So yeah, totally agree. And I think that's definitely the area that I'm most interested in seeing kind of develop.
So I'm curious who your initial kind of target audience was for this, and if you think it's attracted those people, or if it surprised you who has been interested in the game.
It's a really good question. It's a couple of things. I mean, I think fundamentally it is, you know, it is a hostage thriller on one level, but it's also, you know, thematically there's a lot going on. So from a filmmaking point of view, there was a lot I wanted to say with it on you know, on a level, you know, as well as just the genre and as in story terms. But, you know, there's a lot of socio-political subtext going on. There's a lot of discussion to do with gender. There's a lot of discussion to do with just being in a hostage situation, because that's a very psychologically taxing, traumatic experience to be in, and how you approach that, whether you how you approach the situation, whether you align yourself with your hostage taker. So there's a lot that I wanted to say and explore from, you know, from a storytelling point of view. So I guess the target audience was people who would be interested in it filmically, as well as in, you know, the causality of the gameplay of it, and, you know, the cause and effect, relationship building, you know, and playing different versions of this story, because there's some versions of it where you can play where nobody dies and Morgan gets out alive and all live happily ever after. But there's also a version of it where everybody dies, and it's not just, you know, it's not just Morgan and Dorian, the antagonist and the protagonist. There's a bunch of other characters that can interweave into the story, and die and you know, become, you know, really involved in it or not involved in it at all. So on two levels, I wanted people to, you know, engage with it filmically and thematically, but also in the gameplay of it. And funnily enough, when I set out to make it, you know, the idea of it being in the cinema for purely film fans was never actually really on the cards. That was just something that developed in the slipstream of, you know, the journey of it, because we did a cast and crew screening, and I was like, I've always been wondering, how do we do a cast and crew screening of an interactive film? And it just came up with the glow sticks idea, which, you know, I didn't know whether it would work or not. And then we did it with the cast and crew screening, and it was a really big success. And we're like, actually, this really worked, and people really enjoyed it. So let's just see if we can build on that. And, you know, we got selected for some film festivals, and then we got the screening. So I would say that's the audience or the style of exhibition of it that I didn't see happening at all. And we screened at the Dinard Film Festival in France in October last year, and the you know the spectrum of people that we had in the audience was like, you had people in their 60s who absolutely loved it, and then you had people from 16 to 60 just in there enjoying it because it was, even though it was a game, it was accessible enough just because it was purely just raising glow sticks that such a spectrum of people could, from of all ages, could appreciate it and enjoy it. And that was another thing that was really surprising for me, because again, as going into it, when we were just being like, we're only releasing it on the gaming platforms, that's the future of it. Naturally your target audience is going to be about 18 to 35, 18 to 40. But just the ability to engage people, from film backgrounds, game backgrounds, of in their teenage years, or people in their in their 60s to 70s. The diversity of people that we were able to reach, and who enjoyed it, really did surprise me. So it's been great to see.
I think that's a really lovely way of kind of bringing people into the world of gaming. We've definitely seen a lot of kind of social gamers who probably wouldn't even consider themselves as a gamer. I saw a meme the other day about someone's mum like accidentally entered a Candy Crush competition and won like $200,000 or something. Yeah. And I think this is one of those things where people could go and experience it and not think, oh, I just went and played a game, but that is essentially, what they've done. And I think there's so many ways that you can experience it beyond the decision making, but you can kind of watch it quite in a linear fashion, and then do it once and put it away, or you have these kind of things to unlock. So you have different scenarios and scenes and relationship statuses that you can unlock, so it kind of awakens the completionist in people as well. I mean, I can definitely see myself going back. Have you played it yourself a few times?
I mean, I've played it ad nauseam. I know it because I had to play test it, and I've been in lots of cinema screenings of it, and I did play it a couple of times. Just with my girlfriend when it was kind of part of the play test, but she was like the first person I sort of watched it with when it was complete, just to sort of see what her reaction was. So, I played it many times, but I like to try and I have a very specific way of playing it that is okay. I've noticed the groups haven't really played it that much. I think a lot of the times we see people playing it in a group in the cinema, they play it in the way that you were describing earlier, that kind of people want to just kind of see what happens if they do something that is a bit illogical and is probably not the advisable thing you would do in that situation at that time. Whereas I play it as I would in that situation, which is, I want to get out alive. I want to be quite strategic. I want to, if I see that there's a character that could help me, I'm like, I want to keep them involved in the story, because they may come and help me later on, or so it's just quite interesting seeing how. But again, it's hard for me to objectively be like, what would I actually play it like if I was in a group without not knowing anything about it? Would I be like that? Would I be curious about exploring the more reckless things, or would I still play it as myself? So I totally agree about that's what we. That's the goal of it, to try and get people to, there's achievements in it as you would in a normal game. There's 18 endings, 12 in 81 and 6 in 2021. So, and there's a lot. And as I said, a lot of people can die or not die. And, you can have good relationships with certain characters and not. So there's so much malleability in the story. And that's absolutely what we want to try and tap into, the completionist bone of gamers.
I want to go back to the cast. So, I mean, the cast are incredible, and you use the same cast, or a lot of the same cast, in both decades, kind of playing different characters, which I think is really clever. I really like. You've kind of started to see that in things like American Horror Story and stuff recently. I think it's a really clever way of bringing in different dynamics to the same kind of actor. What was it like directing actors who are not only playing different characters, but playing multiple versions of the character, essentially? Because you can really decide whether the character is quite brash or quite empathetic. How is it directed in that? How do you even kind of help an actor get into that headspace to do something so expansive?
Well, first and foremost, Roxanne, thank you for drawing the parallel with American Horror Story. You're the first person who's ever actually done that, which is kind of one of the things that I was thinking about when I was writing. It's like that's an example of something that does something similar to this. So yeah, that you're the first person who's made that observation, which is great. And so I mean, funnily enough, with actors, I always sort of say this, and it always surprises me how well actors adapt to this format and how quickly they do it. And I think the reason I've spoken to George and Anna about it, and I think the reason they do is because ordinarily as an actor, when you're preparing for a role, you will explore a character in that way. You will explore them and the scenes that and the right down to specific lines of dialogue and how they're delivered. They will go through various different ways in which they can interpret that scene, or they can interpret the character, they can interpret that line of dialogue that will be drastically different and create drastically different interpretations of that character, whether they are brash or empathetic or altruistic or a bit sociopathic or whatever. So, but on a linear film, they will have to unless they're kind of giving lots of takes with various different interpretations, they generally have to narrow that down to one choice, or it gets done for them in an edit. But what the beauty of this is, what we're saying to them is, in what would be thrown out in that rehearsal period, you can keep all of that. You can keep all these different sides of character you've explored and actually put it on film and execute it and deliver it, because that's the nature of the format. The only technical thing that I always kind of tell them to do, to watch out for, is obviously if it's in a flow chart and you've got you've got a branch where they've approached a scene very, very recklessly, and there's a branch where they've done it very cautiously, or there's a branch where they've burst into tears, and there's a branch where they haven't done that, or there's a branch where they've just seen someone get killed. There's a branch that haven't. And sometimes branches like that with quite varying degrees of emotion will center back into another place. They'll come to somewhere mutual, or eventually they'll come to somewhere mutual that actors have to temper their performances, or just kind of create a mini journey where they return to some kind of mutual state, which is sometimes a tricky thing to do. Or it's sometimes you just build it in, like they've burst into tears, and then you shoot a bit of a montage to show that they've kind of composed themselves and cleared their eyes and those kinds of things. So those are the things that it's partly something that they need to keep an eye on, but as well, as a filmmaker, you want to, naturally, if they've watched someone die and they may have not, you probably want to have a bit of a passage of time in that period where they can compose themselves if they have witnessed something horrific, or and they haven't. So it makes sense that when they both come back to a state where they're kind of neutral in a way, or they're just in a common emotional state. So those are kind of the only things that I really kind of look out for, that actors sort of that I've noticed with actors in this. One, they love they really take to it, the idea of these different emotions that they can explore. And then two, that they just need to pick up that continuity of emotion in some ways, that mutual emotion that may come from various different directions. Those are kind of the only two main things that they need to watch out for, and they take to it really well. So yeah, it was a pleasure working with this cast.
What were you looking for when you were auditioning for the cast? What sort of skill set were you after?
So George and Anna, those were actors who we approached directly straight away, because as when you're making a film, you get a list at the beginning sometimes of sort of actors that might be right for it, and George and Anna immediately stuck out to me on that list because they're two actors whose work I'm really familiar with. George from Vikings and Versailles, and Anna from Rain and Narnia. So they would, and we sent them the script, and they really loved the script and the format, and were really interested in it. And then we hopped on a Zoom call, and personally and professionally, we really melded. We had a similar outlook, as people, and we really just there was really good chemistry creatively between the three of us. So it kind of, yeah, so that's kind of how that happened. And I'd say, for the other roles, when I'm auditioning, I think obviously you're looking for people who have great versatility and can explore the different extremes of emotions. Sometimes, but I think fundamentally a real genuine interest in the format. I think it's really, really important. Because it's still so early in the format and there's so little out there, relative to other formats of, pure games and pure films. There's so few of these out there that there's so little. A lot of people don't really understand the format or haven't experienced it before. So and it's one of those things that, like you said, if you're not passionate about it, or you're not interested in it, or you don't quite get it, you could get quite lost if that. So I think fundamentally that's like a key facet I look for in people, that people who are genuinely interested in the interactive format, or alternate realities, fragmented timelines. They're interested in non-linear storytelling. I guess that they fundamentally have an interest in it. I think that really goes a long way in people getting to grips with the challenges of it. So I'd say first and foremost that is kind of at the top of my list when I'm looking at actors and auditioning them and speaking to them.
So the cast for me brought so much more immersion, I guess, compared to what you would have in an animated game, because there's so much more emotion. Whereas in games that have a similar kind of choose your adventure narrative, you might have a bit of text and the character's face might not even change. It might be voice acted, it might not, but you're not as immersed. Whereas you can really see the changes that you make and the consequences you make that have on that character. What do you think are the other kind of differences and similarities to a typical animated game?
So a really good question again. I think obviously the key difference is, you never, maybe someday you will, but you're never going to have the level of agency that you would, even something like Until Dawn. There are sequences where you can control your character. You're moving through the forest, or you're moving through a mine shaft, or those kinds of things. So it'll happen someday where you can shoot live action footage that you can then move the character around. But again, at the moment, it's especially with the gallery, it's very much choice-based mechanics, and then FMV, full motion video, pre-edited footage that unfolds as a result of the choices that you made. So I'd say that's the key difference. That there is a very you're not going to get the agency that you would in an animated CGI game. But I would say the similarities, like you said, it's causality. The choices that you make matter, and I think especially with the gallery, I wanted to explore. As you noted really early on, that there are story affected, and your relationship. There's a bar. There's a gauge of how good your relationship is, or how bad it is, and I think that was important for me to include. Because I feel like, especially seeing it in the cinema, sometimes audiences, it's quite subtle when a decision that you've made, and it's not entirely obvious the knock-on effect it may have to the storyline, especially if it's something that you make a decision in Act 1 and it doesn't have a knock. You don't actually realize the repercussions of it until Act 3. Sometimes that can get lost. It's something that the audience might not be able to connect sometimes, which again is something that some gamers will really delve into it and explore the causality of what they've done, of every single decision they've made. But when something like this is meant to be experienced in a feature length setting, one playthrough is about 75 minutes, which is like watching a feature film. So you don't want it to interrupt the flow of people kind of sitting and wondering as well, did that happen because of something I did there, or did it happen because of that? I've just found it's a nice way to kind of keep people tracking their stats, almost as you would as a gamer would. You're always tracking what your health is, or how much magic XP you've got left, and things like that. So that was definitely something I really wanted to align more with gaming mechanics and the UI that you would see in a game. So I think that those would be sort of the similarities and differences. Obviously you don't have the level of agency that you do, but the causality that you would see in a video game is very much the same as what you would have in an interactive film. At least what you should do, because every choice should matter in some way, shape, or form, whether that's story related or relationship related or something like that.
Yeah, that really surprised me when I was playing what you said about your early actions causing consequences down the line. Because
Mm,
I made a couple of decisions, and then way further down, they
mm,
kind of alluded to it, and it caused an effect on my relationship with someone. And I was like,
mm,
oh my god, what other
mhm.
decisions have I made that are gonna kind of mess me up?
Yeah.
But in another way, at the beginning, the kind of way that it's filmed, I think, is so connected to games. I think at the beginning of 1981, she kind of puts her pills in a cupboard, and I thought,
Mm,
oh, I might need to know that. And I
mm.
wrote down like the code she put in the door because I was like, am
Yes.
I going to need to know that? And I'm like, I don't know what I need to know or don't. And it's like such a cool experience to know it's gamified because you're like,
Mm,
where's the game gonna come? You
mm,
never kind of know at what point it's gonna appear, and in the meantime, you can just enjoy what's happening.
mm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And those are both very good details that you picked up on, because I don't know if in your playthrough the code did come back into it, but it can. As well as the pills
Spoilers.
can come into it as well. So yeah, exactly. And that's where that's where the crossover between filmmaking and game happens, because as a filmmaker, you want to you would in a linear film, if it's something that is going to be play a part in the story, you would subtly try to draw attention to it. And it's kind of where the light you're never going to please everyone. And it's really interesting how, especially with the rise of investigative stories and things like that, how subtle do you make those kinds of things? What's the audience you want? Do you want to do something that's really subtle that they may not notice, that they may need to remember? Or I think with the gallery, I played it quite, like you said, like you see what she types in, and because again, I'm thinking of a cinema audience who, as opposed to if it was a wide shot and you saw her type of code in, and because then it's a bit more investigative in that sense, because as a gamer you would be scanning the whole frame all the time and kind of looking at what they're doing. So kind of finding the right balance of something that is accessible enough to as wide an audience, but also challenging at the same time. Because I think, yeah, with the gallery, I think the challenge in it comes in the completionist element, because there are some endings that are really specific to get to. You need to do a very specific combination of things to get to certain endings, for something to come into play. Like the pills, I think it's quite a specific combination of things that you need to do for that storyline to really get teased out. So that's where I feel the gaming element really comes, and the challenge of it comes into its own. It's what are the combinations of decisions I need to make to get to this branch or this outcome, or exploring this side of the story, or bringing this character back into play, or this object. So yeah, that's the balance that you're always trying to find.
And it's not just the kind of game elements as well. Kind of cinematically and thematically, it's also very beautiful. How did you balance that kind of effort of making sure that as a film it was staged right and kind of directed in the right way, and your angles were set up right? You've got kind of multiple cameras in each scene and gamified at the same time. How on earth do you kind of balance both of that?
Thanks, Roxanne. I mean, it's just that's one of those things where I think experience has helped. The gallery it was at the time was my fourth. It is my fifth that I made, and that's a balance that you're always trying to get, because with this something like this, the gallery has 5 hours and 18 minutes of edited content in it, which is and shot in 6 weeks. If this was a normal film, I would just need to be you're working towards a 90-minute runtime, 90 minutes in that. So cinematically, you never, unless you've got like a lots of time, there are certain things that you're not going to get the texture that you would get when it comes to shooting, because you've got so much to cover. Like if this was a linear film, there would probably be a lot more montages, or really detailed close-ups, or just lots of extra coverage of the detail of the fabric of the story. We probably get more coverage or angles than what you saw. So it's kind of trying to find that balance where you and know your limits when you're scheduling it, and when you set out to do it. It's like, how can I shoot what I need to shoot to tell the story, and get the decision points articulated in the correct way, but also create something that's filmically engaging and looks good and looks of a standard that belongs on a cinema screen. And that's just something that comes with experience. What the minimum, what you can get realistically and achieve within a short period of time when you're scheduling this kind of thing, and what isn't quite necessary that you would shoot on a linear film, but that you won't, that you one can't get, but that isn't necessarily needed in something like this. So and that comes with, not just the experience of myself. A lot of the crew on the gallery had worked with me on previous interactive films. So Harry Stewart, the cinematographer, he was the B cam operator on the Complex, and he was the cinematographer on 5 Dates. So he'd worked on 2 interactive films with me before. Sylvia, the script supervisor, who's a very important part of the whole, making sure all the branches are working, and we're not getting ourselves in continuity rabbit holes across the different branches. She was on the Complex with me as well. Hannah Wing, hair and makeup, Freya, the costume designer. So a lot of the key HODs, the heads of departments, had experiences in interactive as well. So they knew what the pitfalls of it for their specific departments were and how to work at that pace as well. So with Harry Das, it was just, sitting down and making, how can we make something that filmically looks beautiful and we're very proud of, but is also quick to shoot with. So he, with it in the 81 version, he wanted very specific vintage lenses. So he got the zoom lens from the 50s that gave it this kind of, misty kind of, older look that almost made it look like it was shot in film. And then if you watch the 2021 version, we switched out the lenses to a very modern, sharp Hook S4s, which are kind of the industry standard that people are shooting things on now, which are very crisp with a very shallow depth of field. And we shot that all handheld, whereas all 81 was shot on, dollies and sliders and sticks, which is more akin to how films would have appeared back then, as opposed to the more sort of, run and gun, handheld, shaky kind of thing, which is you see more in modern stuff. So they were creative decisions. It's just tempering between ambition and practicality when you're shooting that much, and just finding that balance of something that looks beautiful but is also functional, so to speak.
There is like so much complexity behind all of this. And you mentioned the gallery was done in 6 weeks with 5 hours of edited footage. And you alluded to 5 Dates, which was a project done entirely virtually in lockdown, right? Where's the inspiration coming from in your head to keep pushing these boundaries, and especially during lockdown? I mean, that was a really tough time, and to keep working during that time and creating something so special. What is inspiring you to do this?
I think it's just, just the gift of being able to do it. I think in the sense that, as a creative and a filmmaker in this day and age, you're or game maker, you're always looking for your niche about where your speciality is that can, on a very basic level, keep getting you employed. That's the thing. You're always looking for that. And I was given the gift of having the opportunity to get into interactive films, and finding myself as something of a specialist in that now 4 years later. I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be making these projects all the time. So that's kind of my basic motivator in why I want to keep making them. But looping back to something I said earlier, just the ability to explore different genres in this really fascinates me. And like I said again, 5 Dates is something that, the decisions that, and watching people Twitch stream it and stuff like that, the decisions that you're making, in people invest and get as tense and nervous about making a decision of when you're on a date with someone as they do when it's a life and death situation in the gallery or in the Complex. So that fascinates me, is that how can I explore different genres and different stories and create and find decision points that, while they may seem trivial in comparison to, stakes wise, that they evoke that same, tension and that same, that same immersion that people will get from, any whatever a life and death situation, to something as trivial as, what to say on a date or what drink to order or what something like that. And that, to just explore that within different stories and different scenarios, that's what keeps inspiring me. And at the moment, because there's so much to explore, it feels like there are lots of ideas that run through my head because there's so much yet to be explored. So I'd say those are the two key things: just the opportunity to be doing what I'm doing, but also the wealth of opportunity that hasn't been explored yet, storytelling wise. Those are the two key things that motivate me and inspire me.
What's next for the gallery? You've just been at London Games Festival, and yeah, I think what is next for the gallery this year? What's coming up?
So, well, the gallery it's kind of had quite a long life. So it had, we had the games released on all the major platforms, so Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Switch, and iOS and Google Play Store for Android. That was in September. Then we started a film festival run, starting with D9 in October, and then up until our limited cinema run as part of the London Games Festival. So that's sort of about like a 6 month kind of lifespan of its release, which has been amazing. And I think we have a few more cinema screenings lined up for it in the coming months. But I think, that's that I'm looking at. We're hopefully shooting in August. So that's kind of the next project. So I think with the gallery, it's we've got a few more screenings, and it's kind of coming to its natural kind of a natural pause as I move on to the next project. But I think the other step that, not just for the gallery, but for all interactive films, which is almost for me the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle of the exhibition of these things, is to make it available to streaming platforms in the film and TV world. Because
Mm.
when I started, it was only just the game platforms where they have an amazing life and amazing appeal. Then with the gallery, we've proved it's possible to show it in the cinema when you're crossing over to the film and TV market. So it feels like the final piece of the jigsaw to really, really, open them up for the film and TV audience is make them available to streaming platforms, which I think the tech is moving in a direction that, these interactive films, live action video games could easily be hosted on those streaming platforms soon. So that would be it, in within the next year or two. That would be my dream for it to, not only be available on Steam and all of the platforms I mentioned, but also on, an Amazon Prime or a Hulu or something like that. So that would be my dream for the gallery, and everything else I make and have made. So yeah, that's the direction things are heading, hopefully.
I want to touch on platforms quickly now that you've mentioned it. So I was thinking about this yesterday. It would be such a different experience in cinema versus on your phone on the way to work
Mm.
versus sat in bed on your laptop versus console. Were
Mm.
you thinking about that as well, way kind of at the inception when you're filming, or did that come later as well?
It's kind of something that, yeah, it's a really interesting one, because it's something that there's so much discourse around what these are, whether they are, I know there's a bit of snobbery sometimes from the gaming world that they're not games, that they're films, and then there's snobbery from the film world that they're not films and they're games, and then from the film world it's like, it's not really a film if you can watch it and engage with it on your phone or your iPad. And so it feels like we're at the center of just all this discourse that is constantly telling the interactive film or the live action video game that it doesn't belong in any kind of camp. Whereas I think it's actually the opposite, that it belongs in every single camp. I think it's, as long as you make it gamey enough, as long, like if it was just a story where you're only making a decision every 10 minutes and you make 6 decisions that don't really affect the story, then I would say then it's not that it isn't a game, but it's just a really bad live action FMV game. There are ways to do it incorrectly that will shortchange you as a gamer, and there are ways to do it that will shortchange you as a film viewer. But I think the answer is that whenever I set out to make it, I want to make something that gamers can play and have an experience that is fulfilling to them as a gamer, as well as people, as a film audience, whether that's in the cinema or at home, will watch it and, in one playthrough, which, as most film viewers will sit and they'll watch something. The likelihood is they'll watch it and they may replay it once, but, they'll then move on to the next thing, that they will get a fulfilling experience with however much time they want to spend with it as well. So I think that's what, when I set out, that's the thing I'm looking out for. I wholeheartedly believe that these are games as well as films, as well as anything you want them to be. But I also feel that, as a result of that, I really need to make it an as engaging experience for both a gamer and a film viewer as possible. So that's my kind of attitude when I set out to make them. Just do something that hopefully there's something for everybody in it.
So with the gallery winding down a little bit in terms of or towards the end of this year, what is next for you? Is there anything that you can share about your upcoming projects?
Yeah, so the next one I'm making is it's gonna probably be a survival thriller, which I'm looking forward to. So that's gonna be shot in August hopefully, and that we're just casting at the moment, and then that'll hopefully release at some stage next year. I've also got a script for a comedy lined up as well that I would hopefully shoot after that. So yeah, which is sort of more in the direction of 5 dates, 10 dates, that kind of brand of interactive content, so to speak. So I've definitely got a couple. Those are two scripts that are ready to go that I'm hoping going to do back to back. And then just whatever else is out there. I think there's a growing interest from other people in these kinds of things who all want to tell really interesting stories. And just yeah, beyond that, I just want to keep exploring different genres.
Well, I'm very excited for whatever comes out next
Oh,
because
thank
I
you.
definitely enjoy the gallery. I've had a really great time playing, and I'm going to make all my friends play now because I think it's
Oh,
great.
please do. Thank you.
So, where can people find out more about what is coming up? Where can people play and watch the gallery and find out more about what you're up to?
So the gallery is, as I said, it's available on Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Switch, iOS, and Android. So plenty of options to play it there. Hopefully there'll be some cinema screenings in and around London happening soon again. And then as far as I update all my sort of like career developments on my social media and my website. So my website is my name, paulrashid.com, paulraschid.com. And then I'm on Instagram and Twitter, which is my handle is just at Paul Rashid, Paulraschid. And I also want to try and get into Twitch streaming a bit more. So you can also find me there if you want to, which I think my name is Paul Rashid 8. So I definitely want to get involved in more Twitch streams with FMV games and other games as well, just to sort of see like open those up to people and just see what people want next as well. So just to try and engage with the people who are interested in this kind of content. So yeah, that's where you can find out the most about what I'm up to.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I think we'll conclude our episode there. So thank you so much. And for everyone watching and listening, please check out Paul and his work. We will also leave links in the descriptions of any of our platforms. I have been your host for today, Roxanne. You can find me at Xai Gaming, that's XAI Gaming. And please follow Game Dev London on all platforms at gamedev.london. And we'll see you again next week for another episode. Bye.